In the mythical realm of paradise, the weather was pleasantly warm with the sun shining brightly. Melodies from birds filled the air, butterflies fluttered gracefully, and a gentle stream whispered as it meandered past stones on its journey. Amidst this serenity, towering trees laden with flowers and fruits proudly stood, surrounded by a myriad of blossoms. Eve wandered alone in the garden during the morning hours, while Adam ventured into a different section. Her solitude was broken by a voice. "Hello, gorgeous. It's another beautiful day, isn't it?" hissed the serpent. "Absolutely, it's wonderfully serene. I love it here. Hopefully we can stay forever," she answered. "Have you tried this before?" asked the serpent, presenting a captivating apple to her. "No, we are prohibited from consuming the fruit from the tree of wisdom. We were told by God that we could eat from any tree except that one," she explained. "But it's incredibly tasty, and eating it would grant you wisdom akin to God's. You could even elevate to being almost divine. God is not around at the moment, and he will never know. Could it really cause any harm?" On a radiant and sunny Saturday morning, Kenny Richardson still had a couple of sections of his lawn needing his attention. Despite the heat causing him to sweat through his t-shirt, his face lit up with a wide smile. He took great pride in his lawn's rich, deep green appearance, particularly after a fresh cut. Despite being able to afford a riding lawn mower, he strongly preferred the precise finish that a manual push mower offered. His expression soured upon seeing an Apex courier vehicle pull up near his property. With his wife away on a shopping spree, it meant he had to interrupt his lawn maintenance to receive a delivery. Pausing his yard work was something he disliked. "Wow, your lawn is quite the sight," commented the delivery person as Kenny walked over. "Indeed, it's all premium Kentucky bluegrass. I'm not a fan of those common blend varieties you find elsewhere. The ryegrass is fine, but I really can't stand fine fescue." "It's as if fescue is the pesky cousin of invasive weeds," Kenny replied. "What's the delivery today? It's actually intended for your wife, but you can sign off on it with some identification," the delivery man mentioned. Kenny fetched his driver's license from his shorts pocket. The courier took a photo of it, expressed his gratitude, and handed Kenny an envelope. Kenny gave it a quick look before taking it inside, without opening it. He then resumed his lawn mowing, finishing just as his wife returned. "I've got the groceries. You have an envelope on the table." A courier from some upscale service left it earlier, Kenny mentioned. Transitioning from the car to the kitchen table in a few strides, Kenny brought in the groceries. Setting down the last bag, he saw his wife, together by 35 years, sitting on the sofa in the living room, silently shedding tears as she gazed at a number of papers. "Has someone died?" Love, Kenny asked. Sai attempted to speak but remained voiceless. Such an expression of despair had not crossed her face since the news of her mother's demise years prior. He joined her on the couch, wrapping his arms around her, offering comfort through their embrace, remaining until her sobbing subsided. "Ian Ross died yesterday," Sai finally whispered. Kenny knew of his wife's close relationship with her ex-boss, yet the depth of her grief surprised him. Their professional relationship spanned a decade, though they hadn't met since moving from Phoenix, Arizona, to Charlotte, North Carolina, about 10 years ago. Kenny, not the most naturally empathetic, found the profound mourning for a former employer remarkable. He recalled CI's fond memories of working under Ian, always praising him as an ideal gentleman and a remarkable guide. He remembered her concern for Ian after his wife's death, a few years before their relocation, and how Ian seemed to have recovered from his loss and ailment. After settling in their new home following Kenny's significant job promotion, he mentioned he needed to return to Phoenix for a funeral in 3 days. "Is it necessary for you to go to the funeral?" Kenny questioned. "Absolutely necessary," CI affirmed, her gaze locked onto her spouse's. Their extensive partnership enabled him to discern the real vexation in her eyes. "Indeed, I must depart," she articulated softly. "All right, if it matters so much to you, then let's both attend," Kenny proclaimed, showing his concern was shared. Kenny's expectation of CI's happiness over his willingness to accompany her was misplaced. She continued to look at him. "Your presence isn't required. I'm capable of handling things by myself. I've done it before," she reminded him, reflecting on her solo journey to Phoenix to visit Joni. "I know. You're independent." "My desire is simply to be by your side," Kenny replied. "If that's what you want," she whispered back. Therefore, the news of her ex-manager's death was delivered to her by courier the following day, making Kenny wonder, Don't you find that slightly peculiar?" His question remained unanswered. "I'm genuinely worried about Ian," CI shared with her companions at an upscale Italian restaurant 3 months post the event, mentioning his persisting grief over Anna's passing. While she acknowledged that grief has no timeline, she pointed out its detrimental effect on the business, including some of his recent poor decisions. Having been the reinsurance vice president at Phoenix General Insurance with Ian as the CEO, CI deeply felt his difficulties after 22 years with the company, climbing the ranks and frequently being Ian's essential support in the reinsurance sector. "Maybe now's the time to connect with Ian on a more personal level," Joni Caputo, Ian's executive assistant, hinted with a smirk, observing Ian's evident affection for Cy, including his playful looks. This suggestion had all 4 women at the table, who were fond of their boss's charm and physical fitness at 60, sharing a light-hearted giggle. Chandra Ferguson, half in jest, suggested that CI should adopt a more flirtatious demeanor to cheer Ian up, including dressing more provocatively, to which Ilar Anderson added their collective effort to keep it discreet among the staff. They toasted to this idea as a thoughtful gesture, then continued with their dinner. A week on, CI asked Ian out to dinner, making a point to dress in a more alluring fashion. Her flirtatious approach was explicit, and by the end of the dinner she noticed a revival of the old Ian, particularly as he showed keen interest in her outfit and even initiated physical touch, signaling a hopeful change. He's on his way to becoming his usual self again. CI optimistically shared with her friends afterward, convinced that, with a bit more time, the familiar Ian would completely return. The group humorously acknowledged that sometimes direct seduction could be more impactful on men than seeking therapy or professional advice, recognizing this approach with mutual amusement and understanding. This occasion, Ian invited Kelly for lunch the next Tuesday. She opted for a tight, dark green silk dress. As she prepared to leave for lunch, she loosened 2 more buttons at the top and bottom, making the dark green frill and the upper part of her stockings visible from certain angles. "My, you do look fetching," dear Elvira murmured to her as she made her way to the lift, passing Elvira's desk. She gave Elvira a wink as she passed, with Ian following. Elvira smiled as Ian gently patted Kelly's backside as he entered the elevator after her. Kelly responded with a smile. The subsequent week, Ian invited her for lunch again and dinner the next Thursday. As she left for work, she packed her overnight and clothes bags in her car. Her husband departed for work earlier, which allowed her to hide the bags in the trunk until she could sneak them into the house later. She thought about her husband, planning for the first time to aid her boss through his grief and despondency. She never questioned her love for her spouse, Kenny. He served as her life companion, an outstanding husband and father. Their paths crossed in their freshman year at Arizona State University, and they tied the knot shortly after graduation. Kenny, who worked as a certified public accountant, brought home a significant salary. Together, they nurtured 2 children, relished in holiday getaways, and envisaged spending their twilight years side by side. She understood that her husband, Kenny, completely trusted her, a fact that would greatly aid her in her endeavor to assist Ian. Kenny wouldn't intrude without cause, and she had full confidence in her capability to maintain her dealings with Ian separate from her family life. Aware of her marital status, Ian selected a remote restaurant, positioned in an area where the affluent who seek discretion frequent. Their meal was pleasurable, filled with lively dialogue. At his residence, Ian exhibited both chivalry and a hint of roguish charm, making her feel cherished. She sensed her employer guiding her towards his sleeping quarters, and she proceeded without hesitation. Ian, who was 60, kept himself in shape, a detail she couldn't help but admire, particularly when he was not dressed. His slow and sensuous way of undressing her, revealing her choice of a black corset and corresponding lingerie, did not escape her notice. Ian cautioned that he might be quick initially as it had been some time, yet he was equipped with medication to prolong their encounter. They engaged in tender moments for about half an hour before passionately consummating their relationship for roughly 10 minutes. Resting atop Ian afterward, she shared her contentment. "That was marvelous, Ian," she whispered gently. He proposed more nights together, possibly in varied locales, a suggestion she accepted assuredly. Later, she took a shower and redressed in her office clothes, informing her husband of a late work night, promising a 9 p.m. return, which she fulfilled. Kenny had gotten pizza. The leftovers awaited her in the kitchen upon her return. Kenny, slightly buzzed from beer, was in the living room. She offered a brief peck, checking if he had dined. "I had a salad from Oro," she mentioned to him, recognizing his effort to brush his teeth, given her aversion to the taste of feta cheese. "Thank you," she replied to his gratitude, turning away with a concealed eye roll. Even though she had showered after her time with Ian, she also brushed her teeth, doubting Kenny would notice any residual scent. She then slipped into her cozy evening wear and settled next to Kenny in the living room to watch a basketball match, acknowledging internally her enjoyment of her moments with Ian free from guilt. Her affection for her husband remained unchanged, and she did not neglect his needs. She figured that throughout the week she and Ian alternated between prolonged lunch meetings and dinners, changing the schedule for each. Each gathering ended with a private moment, once during lunchtime and twice following dinner, understood only by her and her 3 colleagues, with no one else aware of their activities. Her job seldom required travel, but on the occasions it did, Ian was her companion, a detail she omitted to share with Kenny. Successfully avoiding prying eyes for 5 days, they effectively lived as a couple, exactly the status they declared at the hotel Ian chose. In truth, their trip lasted several days longer than necessary. Ian and she utilized the extra time to revel in each other's company and their surroundings. Among their leisure pursuits was a day spent on a boat, nude and intimately involved, initially reluctant as Ian began to remove her swimwear. Because of nearby boats, his kisses quickly shifted her stance. Soon after, her snug swimsuit was discarded on the deck, and shortly she found herself lying on the cushioned seats, legs wrapped around Ian as they made love. As they did so, 2 other vessels sailed past, offering their endorsement. She blushed and laughed when Ian acknowledged the onlookers while they continued their intimate act. "I hope we don't encounter these people at dinner tonight." The mortification was intense, she noted. On further adventures, she learned of Ian's penchant for initiating intimate encounters in unique places. He led her to a fitting room in an upscale boutique in Boston, mentioning he had experienced this with his previous wife many years ago. The sales clerk shot her an understanding glance as she completed her purchase, and she wore the dress to dinner that evening but left it behind with Ian when the trip concluded. She was enthralled by Ian's adventurous spirit, and her fondness for him continued to grow, despite her hesitance to admit it. Her original intent of offering support had ended quite a while back. "You're not thinking of leaving Kenny, are you?" Joni asked bluntly during a luncheon with 4 women a few months down the line. "The boss seems to have bounced back, but there appears to be something more between you two." Callie hadn't explicitly acknowledged that her relationship with Ian had deepened beyond one of compassion. She felt that by not speaking about it she wasn't betraying her marriage. However, even if she were to talk about it, she didn't believe her actions compromised her marriage. "Of course, I'm not leaving Kenny," she stated with sincerity as the other 3 women listened intently. Yet she never defined her connection with Ian as an affair, to the women or to herself. She always described it as a relationship, viewing an affair as just crude sexual liaisons, and what she had with Ian as more meaningful, though it did not eclipse her love for her husband. After months of involvement with Ian, she withheld nothing from him. The length of their affair was ambiguous, but after a year, circumstances changed. The head of the DO & Touche office in Charlotte, North Carolina, had a heart attack, and Kenny Richardson was chosen for the promotion to this position. Kenny was happy about the promotion, though the short notice created a small inconvenience for them. She was able to work remotely from the Charlotte office of her company, yet she needed to stay an extra month until their affairs in Phoenix were settled. Dio quickly bought the Richardsons' house, but arranging utilities, storing furniture, and other common responsibilities required time. Relocating wasn't her preference, but she saw Kenny's promotion as a crucial professional milestone with significant benefits for their financial situation and way of life. She had no choice but to agree, particularly since she could continue her job in Charlotte. When Kenny moved to Charlotte, she made sure her last month with Ian was unforgettable, almost living together with him. By the time she left for Charlotte, there was little they hadn't explored sexually. Soon she figured out she could make annual visits to Ian. Telling her oblivious husband she was going to Phoenix to see her best friend Joni for a week, the unsuspecting Kenny, whom Cy teasingly called him, consented without second thoughts. Joni and her spouse Stan welcomed Sai and Kenny at the airport. It was Kenny rather than Joni who raised an eyebrow at his wife before giving her a hug. He missed the similar expression on his wife's face. Joni then hugged Kenny, with the embrace seeming earnest to him. Kenny and Stan shook hands, with Stan saying, "Been a while, brother. How's it going?" Stan asked. Kenny gave a non-committal answer, having met Callie's close friends and their partners several times before cohabiting with Sai. He always felt out of place when these couples got together. "Such a great guy," Joni praised, "to come all this way to support your wife. Ever run into Ian? At holiday parties or maybe barbecues? It's what one does for their spouse, isn't it?" Kenny noted, sensing Joni's subtle disapproval. Joni and Stan led the pair to a cafe, where they met up with two of Si's friends and their partners. When Si's companion was spotted, both Chandra and Elvar expressed surprise. Kenny glanced down to see if his fly was open, or if he had accidentally soiled his clothes earlier. Throughout the dinner and drinks, conversations among the couples flowed relatively well, yet Kenny noticed he sometimes received silent gazes from the women. Following the meal, Joni and Stan took Sai and Kenny back to their lodging, promising to pick them up the next day for the funeral home visit to pay their respects to the deceased. "There might be some faces you remember, though it's been a long while. I understand if you decide to skip tomorrow and instead choose to rent golf clubs for a game with some old friends," Sai offered. "No, as I said, I came to support you," Kenny said, his annoyance apparent. Ian Ross was a prominent personality in Phoenix for many years, with a wide circle of business contacts and acquaintances. A considerable line had formed at the funeral home as people came to show their respects. Kenny guessed that the three individuals in front of the coffin, a man, a woman and a young boy, were probably Ian's children, her husband and their child. He had not met Ian's family and was unsure if his wife knew them, as she had never mentioned them during her time at Phoenix General Insurance. As CI's group approached the family, the two women hugged tightly, their heads buried in each other's hair. "I didn't expect you to come," the woman cried into CI's shoulder, with Kenny catching the sound of his wife's soothing sheish. "Not now." A woman in her 40s stepped away from CI, eyebrows raised, then quickly looked away, clearing her throat before looking back. "Jackie, this is my husband Kenny. He's here for support and to pay his respects to your dad. They met a few times during the years I worked in Phoenix." "Thanks for having us," she said softly, then introduced her husband and child. Kenny carefully took her hand, being careful not to grip too hard, as was his habit. He offered condolences and shook hands with the man and boy, while CI and Jackie had a quiet chat for a bit after the service. Jackie later invited them, along with 3 other couples, to her dad's house for light snacks like sandwiches and salads. "I didn't know you were so close before, but the way she greeted you implies a strong connection," Kenny noted to his wife as they, along with Joni and Stan, walked to the car. "We've bumped into each other a few times over the years. Besides that, she was always a gracious woman, about a decade older than us," Sai replied, quickly turning to look out the window, ending the conversation. After the funeral and burial, about 25 people gathered at Ian Ross's home for sandwiches and soft drinks. CI and her 3 companions were busy in the kitchen making food, while Kenny lingered at the entrance, quietly sipping a Crown Royal. He perked up when he heard Elira ask for a plate of pickles and olives. "Second cabinet on the right of the sink," Sai instructed, laying out 2 types of bread for sandwiches. Kenny choked back a cough from his whiskey as he quietly left the room, unnoticed by the women. Unaware of the details, he realized there was only one reason his wife would know exactly where the pickle dish was. Suddenly feeling sick, Kenny made his way to the backyard, where Stan found him 20 minutes later. "Everything okay, buddy?" "You don't look well," Stan asked, taking a swig of his beer. "Yeah, I'm fine," Kenny answered quietly. "I wanted to thank you for looking after Sai on her trips here," Stan said, then stopped. Catching the implication, "No problem, she's always been easy to have around. She knows how to take care of herself," Kenny remarked, his smile now carrying a trace of sarcasm. Suddenly I felt the need for another drink. Afterwards, Jackie quietly took Sai to her late father's study. Alone, the younger woman wrapped her arms around the older, sharing her happiness at their meeting. "It means so much that you're here, Sai. Dad would have been so happy to see you." "It came as a surprise to see your husband join you. He's in the dark," "Correct, that's correct. He has no clue," Sai acknowledged. I tried my best to convince him to remain behind, yet he was adamant about tagging along. Oh man, you love them because there's no alternative. The two women laughed heartily together. It might be beyond your husband's grasp, but your support meant the world to Dad after Mum died. He was lost, but your moments together brought him joy, Jackie reflected. I get why moving with Kenny was necessary, yet Dad deeply missed you. He never found someone else always eager for your next visit, Sai said with a touch of sorrow. Kenny's quietness on the drive to the hotel and the next morning as Joni and Stan took Kenny and Kelly for breakfast before their flight back to Charlotte went under the radar. In fact, Sai didn't perceive any shift in her husband's demeanor until they were halfway back home. You've been so quiet. Is everything okay? She asked. Far from okay, but I doubt you want to get into it while flying over Oklahoma, he snapped back. Sai turned away, her cheeks reddening, her mind searching for possible reasons, knowing she'd have to wait for explanations until they got home. Once in their car, Sai attempted to clarify her husband's understanding. Whatever Stan might have told you, it's not what you think, she declared. Stan didn't mention anything. You're the one who has, Kenny replied. What do you mean? She asked, puzzled and slightly annoyed. That time you and your friends were preparing snacks in Ross's kitchen, and you immediately knew where the pickle dish was when asked. It wasn't just some lucky guess, sweetheart, Kenny explained. I might be out of the loop, but I'm not foolish. So when I thanked Stan for his patience during your visits, and he seemed puzzled, although he tried to hide it, it begs the question of how long this has been going on before we moved, giving you a free pass for a week every year for 10 years. Kenny kept his eyes on the road, missing the look of pleasure on his wife's face, yet she quickly jumped into the conversation. It was not an affair, Kenny. I'd call it a connection based on empathy, love. Ian was severely ill 3 months after his wife died, and I felt compelled to help him get back on his feet. True, I had feelings for him. He was a remarkable man, but not in the way I love you. My goal was to show him he was still valuable, offering hugs, closeness, and support, C.I. explained. Repeat that, Kenny demanded. You're saying it wasn't cheating because you were acting out of empathy. Do you think I was born yesterday? If you feel sorry for someone, you should get them a professional helper or a dog. By your account, you were consoling him for over a year, then continued to spend a passionate week with him every year after we moved. That's infidelity by any definition except yours, he argued. No, my affection for him doesn't compare to what I feel for you, she replied. You were close to him for more than a year, stopping only because we moved, he pointed out. How is this not a betrayal? Then you lied by spending a week with him every year. As his wife, you're familiar with every part of his house. I'd wager Joni, Chandra, Elvira, Gina's daughter, and their family knew too, judging by their welcome. It's too much for someone just considered a friend. Your so-called empathy didn't extend to me, your husband, during your adventures. Did it? No. You've got it all wrong, she argued. He needed someone, needed me, and I was there. I'm proud to have been his support. Even in the dim light of the car, Kenny could sense his wife's sense of righteousness. He was sure, utterly sure, she felt justified in hiding her affair for so long. Kenny's discovery lasted merely a week. The next Tuesday, C.I. was handed divorce papers, and that evening, upon her return from work, Kenny was there to present them. Thanks for not doing this at my office, but we're not ending our marriage over something that happened a decade ago, C.I. retorted. So these yearly encounters over the last 10 years don't count as cheating to you. Kenny noted. He's gone, Kenny, C.I. revealed a few days earlier. You were none the wiser. It made no difference to you if you didn't know Kenny's side. He had a week to think and had prepared for C.I.'s defense. To put it bluntly, Al, it was just physical. He meant nothing to you. I should overlook this since it's just a blow to my pride, he concluded. C.I. looked down. I'm sorry for hurting you. It was never my intention for you to find out, she confessed. He felt hollow, overwhelmed with grief, perhaps teetering on despair. All his efforts were to mitigate the anguish after discovering his wife's infidelity. We shared meals together, and over time he began to overcome his sorrow. Our connection deepened naturally, evolving from our friendship. It was purely emotional support, lasting an entire year, C.I. elaborated. To me, it felt like secretly sharing a moment of closeness once a year. For a week, I thought it resembled a tale. Kenny argued it was a mistake. She insisted a single incident could be deemed a mistake. What transpired was more than that. It was a full narrative, he explained. If not for a genuine connection, why did you keep meeting him? Callie tried to speak, opening and closing her mouth without making a sound. She cleared her throat. Ian was an extraordinary individual. I believe I was there for him. I cherished our times together. It wasn't just about the physical aspect, she stated. Extraordinary people don't start affairs with others' partners, especially during vulnerable times. He knew you were married. I could have refused, Kenny said. How do you rationalize your actions as being right? You had a partner. The intimacy you gave him was meant for me. You promised that intimacy to me alone when we married. You betrayed me and broke our promise, yet you show no remorse. Why did I deserve such indifference? It was never about disrespect. I was helping him through a difficult time, Callie defended. Sure, Kenny sarcastically replied. You see it as a good deed. I see it as a betrayal. Callie hadn't expected such a fallout. She never imagined Kenny could grow so distant. They had been together for 25 years, after all. Surely that love meant something, she thought. Yet she was mistaken. Callie quickly found a lawyer who convinced a judge to require 12 mandatory marital counseling sessions. She hoped the counselor could make Kenny see her perspective on aiding Ian. At times, emotional support and conversation are just as important as physical connection, Callie mentioned at the first session. After Ian lost his wife, he needed someone's kindness, and I saw no one stepping up. So you decided you'd carry our marital vows so Ian could feel better. You risked our marriage for Ian, Kenny voiced. It wasn't like that, Callie replied. He was grieving. I was just being a good friend. To me, providing comfort in such a way is unacceptable. You should have also refused. As a faithful partner, he said. I didn't plan this, but as we grew closer, it became part of our relationship. I came to care for him, not in the same way as I care for you, but it was still affection. I wouldn't have been close to him if I didn't feel anything, she said. Did others know? Why were you the chosen support? Kenny asked in the second session. Callie looked away, playing with her nail. We all talked about it a lot, she said. I was closest to him, so it fell upon me. The others had to protect us, making sure it stayed hidden. It felt like the right choice for me, Ian and everyone involved. So easy, Kenny remarked, slowly shaking his head, even if it means sacrificing me. But it appears I'm of no significance. Was I ever considered? I love you, and I have always loved you. I love you as much as the day we got married, Callie said. This isn't about you or me. It was about what Ian needed, and it was outside our marital bounds. This is ridiculous. And you know it, Kenny snapped, rising from his chair. You chose to breach our marriage on your own. Now you're attempting to justify this chaos. You prioritized someone over our union. You excluded everyone else despite such a commitment to me. But WE... rescued him, she muttered uncertainly. So how do you account for all those moments of intimacy with him after you rescued him? How should we view all those visits to Phoenix? Your supposed relationship was just an excuse for inappropriate behavior, he challenged. I wasn't unfaithful, Callie protested. Why can't you understand? It was never about the physical intimacy. He played a minor role, yet everything seemed off the closeness, among other aspects. Kenny stated, you have been disloyal to me for over a year, actually more than a decade. We are done. Cowell, with a nod towards the counselor. Kenny left the room. Mrs. Richardson, regardless of your justifications, essentially embodies emotional and physical unfaithfulness, and your husband has decidedly stated his refusal to agree with your point of view. It's with regret that I must terminate our counseling sessions, announced the counselor. How could you leave me after 25 years? Cy exclaimed to her husband as he came home at the end of the day. Doesn't our history, our love for each other, mean anything to you? I could ask you the same question if I had been aware you were cheating on me with that individual, Kenny responded. Does your love for me mean so little that you would betray me so easily? And claiming it isn't betrayal is futile. If there was any form of romantic involvement with him, then it constitutes betrayal. The children were dissatisfied with their parents. Both understood their father's position, yet Molly continued trying to persuade him to understand their mother's side until Kenny made a FaceTime call to ask his son-in-law if he condoned his wife's behavior. CI, Molly, and Daniel rarely discussed CI's cheating, each assuming the others shared their perspective. Not at all, the son-in-law responded. If my wife were involved with another like that, she'd be out immediately, said Daniel to Molly's surprise. What, Molly, he added. We discussed loyalty, both emotional and physical, before our marriage. She cheated. That's the end of it. And your defense of her actions to your father concerns me about our relationship. No, Daniel, I wouldn't do that to you, Molly reassured. Yes, and your father also couldn't have imagined your mother betraying him in such a manner, Daniel commented. Their son, Jerry, openly expressed his dismay towards his mother. Upon hearing about the divorce from Kenny, he immediately called his mother to criticize her for a prolonged period. Damn it, Mom, how could you do this to Dad and to us? You're ripping the family apart, Jerry shouted. It's not as simple as your father makes it seem, Sai tried to explain. It wasn't just about being close. I was helping someone even with your help. Being romantically involved with someone other than Dad is wrong, Jerry insisted. Jerry noticed a significant silence on the call, lasting a few moments before his mother hung up. Kenny and CI continued to live in the same house but in separate rooms as the divorce slowly progressed. CI and her lawyer contested every aspect to prolong the proceedings. She hoped her husband would come to understand her viewpoint, or at least love her enough to consider her perspective, but wishing for a reunion in their marriage. Yet Kenny gradually lessened his interactions with her, providing no comfort. Do you remember our conversations about traveling the world and seeking adventures together as we got older? Sai asked one night while they watched TV in the living room. Are you really ready to give that up for a lonely life in a small apartment, just because of something that happened a decade ago and didn't affect you in any way? If you hadn't found out because of my careless mistake, we wouldn't be getting a divorce and would still be planning our travels, she pointed out. It was then Kenny's turn to fall silent, deep in thought. Tell me, Joni, would you trust Sai to spend a few days alone with Stan? He asked gently. Of course she's my best friend. She wouldn't cause any trouble with Stan, she confidently replied. You both always say she loves me, but that didn't stop her from cheating on me, her husband. If she could cheat on me, why not on you or anyone else? It was Joni's time to remain silent. Damn, she muttered under her breath. Thank you for listening. Kenny was taken aback that Sai never fully acknowledged the extent of her wrongdoing towards him, even as she begged him to reconsider the divorce. She insisted that her actions with Ian were benevolent and did not undermine her marriage with Kenny. Had you not found out, we would still be married, still in bliss, she claimed during their last meeting before the breakup. After the divorce, CI returned to her office job. She lived alone in an apartment, seeing no need to invest in a house. She occasionally met with her 3 long-standing friends, yet invitations to their homes became rare. Her relationship with her friends was never as close as before the separation. Even after the divorce, she struggled to understand why Kenny could only see her relationship with Ian as a betrayal. I took nothing from him. How could it be damaging? She often questioned her friends. Subscribe to our channel so you won't be deceived by your partner, and don't miss out on our next story, which will dwarf this one in comparison. If you're under 18, beware of the next tale.